And we're back. Welcome to another episode of Syracuse Sports Friends, presented by Krause Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics. I'm Brent Axe. So glad to have you here. This is going to be an off-season of hype, I think, unlike any we've seen in the history of Syracuse football, by virtue of how the world is today, with more voices, more resources, the internet, social media, and things that maybe will be invented as the course of the year goes along. Talking Syracuse football, building up Syracuse football, and anticipating Syracuse football. As we sit here today, as I record this, there are 234 days if the schedule holds as is, because remember, Syracuse still has to add a non-conference game. But as it stands now, they start the season August 31st at the JMA Wireless Dome against Ohio. We're 234 days away from that, and Syracuse fans just cannot get enough of Syracuse football. And there's always an interest and a curiosity when there's a coaching change. But this has been a coaching change unlike any, because Fran Brown is showing receipts. He's bringing in transfers. He shaped up one of the best recruiting classes Syracuse football has ever had since they really started tracking this stuff about 20 years ago, in a few weeks' time. And there's another signing day to come in February, so we'll see if Syracuse can add on to it. But this has been extraordinary, and it is unlike any of the years that stand out in terms of the build-up to a season. And that is the question I had for our Syracuse Sports Insiders for this episode. And we hope you can become a Syracuse Sports Insider today. Just text the word orange to 315-847-3895. You text directly with me. I text directly with you. Back and forth during games. Your feedback, as you're going to see here shortly for podcasts like this. Our Syracuse Sports Insiders get priority on the podcast. They get breaking news first. They get my opinions first. And it has been an incredible journey so far with our Syracuse Sports Insiders. We want to see it continue here in 2024. You can try it free for 2 weeks, and it's just $3.99 a month after that. So the question that I had for our Syracuse Sports Insiders today was this. The 2024 Syracuse football season will be the most anticipated season since ? Right? Because there are a few years in my mind that stood out, but I was curious what the years were that stood out. And there was a definitive pattern that we came away from this. Let's go to some of the insiders and the things that you guys said. My guy Brian Neal says, my first year as a Syracuse student, 1998, my first game in the Dome, the opener against Tennessee. It was absolutely electric, and I feel like there was a lot of buzz for that. Excuse me, no question about it. That season, as we're going to talk about with our guest coming up here shortly, beating Michigan in the Big House, McNabb's senior year, and I felt like lived up to the hype, right? That Tennessee game, of course, that bogus call at the end of the game that gave Tennessee T. Martin a cup. You remember Peyton Manning had moved on, and the eventual national champion Tennessee Volunteers. But, man, that's when, old man moment here, that's when Syracuse football was Syracuse football, right? 98 certainly fits that bill. Scotty K says, I believe that was the highest anticipated season since McNabb's senior year in 1998. Syracuse had a loaded team with future pros. The win at the Big House that year was amazing. Ryan F. drops in to say, oh, this is easy, Brent. It's 2019. Coming off a 10-win season, Elite 11 quarterback Tommy DeVito about to take over the offense with some big transfer names involved and the possibility of College Game Day coming. And Ryan adds this. All the events that offseason, the Elhano video series, the event at City Hall, new uniforms, the feel that Babers had taken the program to that next level in the little typo there, but that means in the ACC. Peter B., for me, the most anticipated season since, don't kill me, Brent, Greg Robinson, 2005. I was a staunch Coach P supporter, but I was intrigued by what a new regime and the vaunted West Coast offense could do for Syracuse. It's truly exciting to see the competition we are going up against for some of these kids, meaning now it is like the MAC and P days. It's been a long time coming, and I cannot wait. Kyle M. says, I remember the opener against West Virginia. This is 2005 now, like it was yesterday, and how packed the Dome felt to me as a 13-year-old. To this day, it feels like it was a major fork-in-the-road moment in the history of Syracuse football. Our Matty S. says, for me, Brent, it's since ever. I'm always the ultimate optimist, but right now, my optimism is off the charts. So a pattern emerged when I asked you guys this question. 1998, 2005, and 2019 felt like seasons that were hyped up. And think how the media changed. Think how things changed in the coverage of the team, social media, the internet, growing up in that time, to a point now in 2024 where it is relentless hype based on all the voices out there, not only the traditional media, but social media, fan media, and ways that you can interact. But as I said, Fran Brown's bringing receipts. Every day we're hearing about a new transfer or a new commitment that either puts Syracuse on their radar or is going to commit to Syracuse. And these are four-star players. Syracuse has more four-star players on its roster now than I think it ever did in the Dino Babers era, maybe a couple preceding that as well. So it's one thing of the curiosity and hype and buildup of a new coach. That's been there. I've seen plenty of those, as you have seen plenty of those as well. But in just a month's time, Fran Brown is showing receipts. So, guys, we are about to encounter what I think is an offseason unlike any we've seen in the history of Syracuse football for a variant of reasons. Now, 98, 2005, and 2019 stand out. But there certainly were some, as we would put it, as if we were voters in the Associated Press poll, others receiving votes, right? Certainly a couple other years came up. Either 87 or 88. Now, look, what was the hype like between the 86 and 87 season, right? You just had newspapers and television and traditional media, and things moved a lot slower those days. You didn't have sports talk radio or anything that was kind of pumping this up 12 months out of the year. The team went 5-6 in 1986, and I feel like close observers of the program felt like they could probably be pretty good next year. But 11-0-1 in that season. But 1988, following up the 87 season, and the kind of the gap that was bridged there, I feel like that era fits this bill. A couple of years in the early 90s, prior to 98, before McNabb came in. 92, you had Texas and Ohio State on the schedule. And let's face it, Syracuse was consistently winning 8, 9, 10 games in that frame. So were there a couple of years, I remember in the early 90s, Quadri Ismail was getting Heisman hype entering his senior season, right? So I feel like there's a couple qualifications there. The other one I wanted to mention was 2009. Had a coaching change, of course, going from Greg Robinson to Doug Marrone. Marrone comes in, the alum, the dream job, trying to invigorate some new passion and energy into Syracuse football after it hit, frankly, an all-time low in the Robinson era. That was enough. But then Greg Paulus came along, right? Greg Paulus, the basketball player? Yeah, from CBA here in Syracuse, New York. Wait, that kid, he hasn't played football for 4 years. And now you're going to make him your starting quarterback? Yeah, they did. And, I mean, they went 4-8 that year. Hey, Greg held his own. I still think they should have started Ryan Nassib in his freshman year, but that's just me. But think of that first game that he started. And by the way, the first play from scrimmage went sailing over his head. But that first game, near sold-out dome, energy, 2005, same thing. 2019, think of College Game Day could be coming. And coming off the 2018 season, people bought in and believed again in Syracuse football. The difference, I think, between any of those other years and this upcoming year is just, as I'm going to talk about with our guest, Matt Park, coming up. NIL, transfer portal, and the resources that Brown had that maybe some of these other coaches did not. I mentioned it. I wanted to talk to somebody who certainly was around and remembered those other years that we brought up, right? And look, if you're watching this, if you're listening to this and you remember some years from the 60s or 70s, hey, throw them at me, but obviously the world's different today. What was hype? It was the 1959 team hyped up coming into that year. I mean, it didn't exist, right? So we're kind of talking like the modern era. But I wanted to talk to somebody who's like me, okay? Certainly has been in the media for a while now, but grew up in Central New York and transitioned from somebody that just followed the program as a fan into the media and has that perspective. And Matt Park was the guy. The voice of the Orange, somebody who has not only called a lot of these seasons in these teams and been around these games in these teams, but before that was just, growing up in Chittenango, New York, watching Syracuse football and can remember some of these names and teams that stand out. So let's bring in Matt Park, and let me once again thank our Syracuse Sports Insiders for your great feedback on this. You created this episode. I asked you guys a question. The feedback was so incredible. I'm like, that's a pod, because that's what being a Syracuse Sports Insider can do. Matt Park, the voice of the Orange. Let's check it out. Matt, it's been fascinating to see what Fran Brown has done in a month's time as the head football coach at Syracuse, and we're going to get into that, but a couple of guys that have been around for a few years and seen a few things, before you know where you're going, you got to know where you've been. And it was fascinating to see what our Syracuse Sports Insider said when I asked them, what are some of the big-time years that you remember that were just hyped-up seasons? Because I feel like we're already at the point where this upcoming 2024 football season there's going to be some build-up to this and some real anticipation to it, and we're 234 days away from kickoff. So there were 3 years that really stood out, and I thought it would be fun to kind of go through those three and kind of get your recollections on not only those seasons, but the build-up to them. And it starts in 1998, right? Donovan McNabb, senior year. There was talk of the Heisman. I remember our old friend Rob King. We're at media day before that season, and Rob says to Donovan, "Are you coming back next year?" Oh wait, that was the question last year, right? So it just goes to show you like how good McNabb was and what the buildup was there. What do you remember of the dawn of that season and 98 and McNabb's senior season?
Well, that's as highly anticipated as it gets. I think we're going to talk about modern times, and
yep,
now you've got social media and so much more that's in the ether than then. But that's a time you're part of 3 straight Big East championships. They'd won 9 games 3 years in a row. Went to good bowls every year. Donovan's one of the handful of greatest players in the history of the program. I mean, to me, if you're thinking about build-up, anticipation, high hopes for the season, that's the time relative to your other recommendations and choices here. The Tennessee game, I think we all can remember, sellout and in the dome and the way it ended. And I just think back then, obviously you're into the games and the twists and turns and that type of thing. So that's a real pinnacle. I think your listeners have picked a good one as far as, what were the high points. I think now we have the hindsight here of more than 2 decades to look back at it. Back then it's like, just didn't get over the hump, had a tendency of kicking back a game that could have or should have won. That's a different type of concern than we've largely had for the last 20 years, which is, how are you going to be competitive in your conference and that type of thing. So, for me, of all your list, that's probably the top up. How could it not be when you talk about being relevant on the conference and national stage, because that was the case back then.
Yeah, beating Michigan at the Big House, and the Labor Day storm was that year, and everything that we were dealing with then. And I feel like
it's funny. I didn't work here then. I was just out of school. I remember watching the Tennessee game on TV, and I was at the Michigan game and had incredible seats. Wow. And that was an awesome time. The quietest, of course, back then, Michigan every week could be breaking a new attendance record. And so that was an attendance record, 110,000, and the quietest that 110,000 could possibly be. It was awesome.
Thanks to Dwight Freeney shutting down Tom Brady and, of course, McNabb in the big game that he had. And that score was deceiving. The final score, I think, was 38-28, but Syracuse just throttled them through most of that game. And, Matt, I feel like all things considered, they get an Orange Bowl bid. McNabb had this incredible season, one of the great walk-offs, the Miami game, his last home game. Yeah, they lost a couple of games that year, but when you're talking about 9-3, Orange Bowl, yet McNabb didn't win the Heisman, but I felt like when we got to the end of that road, it did match the hype. I felt like that was a season that those two things, they rarely match, but I felt like that season satisfied. It'd be nice to win the Orange Bowl, of course, but I felt like the build up to that was not over the top. It felt like it matched. Did you feel the way at the end of that season too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there was so much anticipation around McNabb specifically. I can remember just gathering where I was watching his, college debut or watching, the big game at North Carolina and that type of thing. There was just a lot of buildup. If you remember the silliness of who's our quarterback going to be among three different people? Okay.
I do.
And you're looking at basically a Hall of Famer that emerges from that group and goes on to have an incredible career. So, he's an icon, huge part of Syracuse football history in the, sort of post 44 era. And I think he's a kind of cut above and led teams that were cut above. But if you look at the roster, there were a lot of pros, certainly at that time. And they all should be commended. I mean, that's really again, iconic period worthy of celebration, to 96 to 98, to be in the Big East race all that time. Miami had a little downturn, of course. And, that's a hallmark period.
I'm scratching away cobwebs, Matt, but I believe it was Keith Downing and Kevin Johnson who were the other combatants there. And the quarterback race that, quickly did not become one, as we saw McNabb take the field in 95 against North Carolina. But at the time, it was actually a question mark. Interesting to look back on that. So that's 1998. 2005 came up, and of course, that's the transition from Paul Pasqualoni to Greg Robinson. Hindsight, of course, you look back, things did not work out with Robinson. But, man, the fascination of how different this was going to look, what Robinson would do. He brought in some coaches that were more pro-oriented, and the West Coast offense. Remember, this is the height of the Pete Carroll USC era. It's why Darryl Gross partially brought in Greg Robinson on the recommendation of Pete Carroll. And it's just, when you have somebody, a legend like Paul Pasqualoni, stepping aside and Greg Robinson stepping in, hype might not be the right word, man. It was almost like curiosity. Like, what is this thing going to be?
Yeah, I would agree. Darryl Gross swung big. There were a lot of hits and some misses. We all know, I think the looking back, and unfortunately we lost Greg Robinson recently and far too soon. I just started to use the word epitaph, which might not be fair, but the summation, let's say, of the Greg Robinson era, I think Greg Robinson, first of all, he's a tremendous person, great member of our community. I think he's a pretty solid football coach. I mean, I don't think you fool your way through the career that he had. The condemnation of that time is they didn't have the staff. They didn't allocate the staff appropriately, and it broke some of the bonds that were built by certainly the Pasqualoni De Leon era, and that's what you're seeing Fran Brown, especially. There have been others. Doug Marrone tried to rebuild those, and there have been other attempts. But I think what you're really seeing is they're getting back to that type of thing now. But anyway, going back to that transition, I don't view it really as and I'll say this, full disclosure, I anticipate every season. When people say, oh, this game or that game's not worth my time, I always say this: there's only 12 games a year. You can't get up for all of them. That's a you problem. To me, same thing, football, basketball, whatever. It's a pleasure to watch. It's my job to watch. I get the best seat in the house. So I'm probably, I'm definitely unique in that category. I anticipate every season and every game and build it up. That being said,
go ahead.
That time was obviously weird, right? You went to a bowl in 2004. The bowl was not competitive right from the opening snap. Certainly we all knew that a coaching change is something that possibly could happen, but it happened late in the cycle. I know Darryl Gross years afterward kind of said that was part of it, that he wasn't really ready right then to maybe do it. And it kind of impacted, the ripple effect that came. And there were some good players here, some, not enough in the Robinson era, but they just weren't competitive. There were other changes, if you remember, at that time. I mean, you're changing your sort of marks. They changed the turf in the dome. They upgraded the weight room, if I'm not mistaken. Because I remember thinking at the time, well, the previous guy could have used this too.
Right.
And that's, I always think every time there's a coaching change, first of all, there's at least the high that it's a step back in some regards with every coaching change. It's just the way it is. But there's also a honeymoon period, and there's a best behavior, and there's a refreshing of okay, we're really putting the right resources to this. Is everybody doubling down and doing what you're supposed to do? And so that has sort of happened over time. It's certainly happening now in the Fran Brown era. And when you think about assistant coach compensation and the types of things they're doing for recruiting and that type of thing. If you want to be successful, you've got to make those kinds of commitments. In retrospect, of course, you look back and Pasqualoni was moved on from because people were bored with 8-4. You'd take 8-4. You'd take 8-4
every year.
Coming year. Absolutely.
It was a lesson.
People don't want to hear it, but it's hard to go 8-4. And 8-4 gets you in a good bowl, and 8-4 moves. Nobody wants, and even there, you don't want to feel like you're at a plateau no matter what, right? But I think people now, in hindsight, are understanding how difficult it was to do what Paul Pasqualoni did.
Well, and I think this transition, you go from 98 to 2005, speaks to Matt how in just that time, and you teach it at Newhouse. I do too. You're a much bigger deal than I am. I show up for I show up for 5 weeks a semester. You're really immersed in it. But one thing we teach our students, of course, is the media itself and how it changes. And obviously these days it is insane the rate that it changes. But think of 1998. Okay, what is hype in 1998? You've got the traditional media, the newspapers, the television. If you get on the cover of like Street and Smith's magazine, that was a big deal. The internet's still in its infancy, right? We're still kind of figuring it out, and we're blogging and we're doing what? We're logging on to AOL, like the internet, message boards, and certainly social media, not a thing. 2005, the transition between Pasqualoni and Robinson, and admittedly, I was a part of this as somebody that was a talk show host in Syracuse. Sports talk radio, much bigger deal than it was in 1998. The internet, much bigger deal. Message boards were there. Blogs were there. The internet presence was there. There's more voices that lead to these things, that call for coaching changes and observe this stuff, right? So just in that short period of time, what Syracuse was in 98 versus in 2005 when they're trying to turn a page was fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I just want to point out within arm's reach here, I've got I tried to blend the old and the new, but I've still got
That's great.
I got my magazines here. I got my
Matt's got the Street.
I got my Phil Steele's. I've got that every year. Jam packed. I've got 20 years worth of these.
He brought props. Fantastic.
Stacked up, but we're on. You got the old school media and the new. Yeah, I mean, if you want to fast forward to now, I mean, certainly it's an entirely different world. And look, I don't want to quell the buzz at all. I'm jumping out of my shoes, excited that people are excited about the year. But people are excited now because of and in different ways than ever really existed before. Now, every Tom, Dick, and Harry who plays college football puts out on Instagram their thing with their standing on the this, and they got the, leaning on the Lamborghini or the, the cartoon caricature. I said, God bless them, but everybody who's rushing and has it on Twitter and Instagram, and oh my, you wouldn't know if you were standing next to King Joseph Edwards in the deli line at Wegmans, right? But because this guy, selects Syracuse or, relatively speaking, Syracuse, Ole Miss, Georgia, pick a hat, on national TV. Those are all really positive, fun things that get people excited. I think there's a ton of reasons to be excited about what's going on right now.
It's a different time, and it's funny because Fran Brown in his one of his Zoom calls before I think it was the signing day Zoom call a couple of weeks ago, goes, that's not what we're about. I'm like, yeah, but you still did it, right? It shows that you gotta appeal to what's out there, stand out, do something different, particularly in the social media era, right? There was one more year though, Matt, that I wanted to cover with you, and that's 2019. And media hype is part of it in this way because, of course, 2018, Syracuse wins 10 games. Dino Babers is extended. There's a transition there from Eric Dungy to Tommy DeVito. We had seen a little of Tommy DeVito play in the Dungy era, but the feeling was, okay, now you're handing off from one of the most successful quarterbacks in the history of the program to a true blue 4-star Elite 11 quarterback. So you're feeling good about recruiting. The hype there was present in that Syracuse did what I thought was a phenomenal series. The Ohana family videos where you're seeing the team training in the offseason. It was really the most behind the scenes look we had seen at Syracuse in an offseason really ever. And it was almost a Hard Knocks of Syracuse football. So people are feeling that. You're trying to capture the buzz of the previous year. There was strong indications, I think it was going to happen, that had Syracuse beaten Maryland in the second week of the season, the College game day would have been there the next week for Clemson. And it just felt like, okay, you need some consistency here. You need that back-to-back bowl game. And it just felt like there was a surge going into that year, and that Syracuse, at the very least, was knocking on the door in the ACC.
Yeah, but they got whacked by Maryland, right? And it just wasn't really there. I think instead of saying, hey, putting down the 2019 team, to me, it has more to do with 2018 team was loaded with seniors. You had a quarterback that was suited for what was going on and was very, very effective in Eric Dungy. Tommy DeVito, as history has shown, is a capable enough quarterback to win games in the National Football League. God bless him. What a phenomenon he and his family became this fall, right? And borderline like, Linsanity and all that. And we all enjoyed the ride, and you kind of looked at it sideways a little bit because there's a little bit of a joke associated with his name and his whole sort of presentation, because you always had a degree of skepticism. He's as good as any quarterback that we've seen here in 7-on-7 or just, shorts and t-shirts slinging the ball around. He's as good as there's been. That's what built up his, elite. That's what Elite 11 is. And that's what built up his reputation. But it just didn't function here that he looked like an NFL quarterback and is going to lead this team like an NFL quarterback. In fact, you could go back. Ryan Nassib is also an NFL quarterback. He just was in a circumstance where he wasn't going to play, happened to be for the same organization. But Ryan Nassib, you had the impression, okay, this guy's leading the team. This guy plays every game. This guy. So we're kind of muddling the waters here a little bit, but that's what I think that time period shows. Not to, retroactively douse anybody's enthusiasm for the 2019 season. There's all kinds of reasons that, again, you capitalize on what happened. The 2018, there's a reason that ticket sales spiked, and the positive feeling of the bowl game and getting what you did out of that trip. That's all part of riding the crest of this type of thing. In my opinion, that's what happens now. You strike while the iron's hot. It's not a coincidence. You got a new coach. You've got the reseeding at the Dome. You've got, more ticket information coming out here in the coming weeks about how the seats are going to look and where you're going to go and where your seats are and what the prices are. And, that's all stuff that gets rolled out in the next few weeks. And there's got to be a wave where you ride this anticipation and enthusiasm and build it into something.
Matt, no question about that. You brought up Nassib. And I want to get I don't want to say the years here, but earlier in the pod, I kind of did the 2 years that are kind of the others receiving votes, right? Because 98, 2005, and 2019, clearly the standouts here. There was a pattern that emerged when I asked our insiders this question, but there were certainly other years that came up. Is there one or two that you remember that we haven't discussed yet that you felt like at least belong in the conversation?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I'd have to kind of go back to what I said before. I'm in the business of anticipating every game and every season. I will say this, like when you come across people in the community in the summer, and people tend to go, "Oh man, looking forward to football." Hey, whatever positive, whatever thing there is to spark someone's enthusiasm for the year. Oh, we're opening with a conference game. Looking forward to it, right? Yeah, of course I am. But I also like to play golf and take
right.
in the summer. So around here, our summers are so beautiful, but they're short, and you don't want to rush through them. So I'm happy for when football season comes around, but it can come around on its own schedule. You know what I mean? So
I got news for you, pal. This year's going to be different.
Yeah, but it has a connotation to it. But yeah, I think this summer, there will be a little bit of a wave there, in part because of some of these other things that we're talking about from a business perspective, and again, there's still a game that's got to come up on the schedule. But If you think about what comes up here in the coming days and weeks, again, information about reseating and ticket packages. Schedule comes out at the end of January. Tickets go on sale in the first part of February. I think you'll hear a buzz. You'll hear people talking about what kind of happens. You've got your spring game, which will get going. I don't think there'll be the off-season disappearing in quite the same way that maybe sometimes happens, really for the reason I just mentioned. And again, you open the season at home, and between the reseeding and dome upgrades, and all that stuff goes hand in hand. And so I think that builds into anticipation. So this is a big one.
This is a big one in the sense, and Fran Brown has the advantage that the previous coaches we discussed, Matt, did not, and that is the transfer portal, and that is name, image, and likeness. So Fran Brown comes in, certainly had the reputation as a recruiter, went right to work with just a couple of weeks before the early signing day. There's another one coming in early February, of course, and the portal in his background, and he, in the manner of just over a month, has brought in Kyle McCord, has brought in Fidel Diggs, has brought in a number of transfers, right, that have addressed positions of need right away. So you're showing receipts. You're saying, okay, not only is this what we're going to be, I'm showing you how we're going to make the recipe here with these players. Plus, you convince a Marlo Wax to come back. You convince a Justin Barron and an Aronde Gatson to come back. So it's not just hype. Fans are seeing the receipts and seeing what the team's going to be here on January 10th, and certainly more to come as we go, right? So I feel like that's the difference there, plus what you're hearing about Fran Brown. Matt, your interview with Fran Brown, the first we heard from him, right out of the gate, like you got to win the room, you got to win the press conference, every coach has to do that. But there was a genuine connection there that people felt right from the start, and it is not dissipated here as we speak on January 10th. So I kind of wanted to get your sense of what Fran has done, and, how I agree with you. I don't like to rush through the offseason, but I feel like I am going to talk more Syracuse football in the offseason than I ever have here in 2024, and Fran is the reason.
Yeah, I agree. I think my first impression of Fran Brown, look, and I don't think this is unlike anybody else, but full disclosure, within 2 days of him being hired, I don't know that I ever knew who he was or considered him or any of it. You start kind of asking around to people that have been in places where he is and all that. But walking away from the interview we did on his first day in town on a Sunday night, oh, okay, I get it. And I think we've all come across people and you're like, this guy won a job interview. Like he beat out somebody, he or she or whatever. But then walking out of the office there, that meeting him the first time, I'm like, okay, I understand how he connects with people, how he sells people on his vision. And to me, the biggest attribute that Coach Brown and his staff have kind of brought in, and it applies to Kyle McCord, and it applies to all these transfers and whatever. You and I, Brent, you started at the beginning talking about how much we've seen and been around. I could run down, got it up on the computer here. We can go through the whole blow by blow of 25, 30, 40 years and talk about why it worked, why it didn't work, why there's built-in restrictions, how it's tough to win here, blah, blah, blah. New people come in, fresh blood, used to winning. They don't want to hear it. Fran Brown doesn't want to hear why they haven't won or why it's hard or what. And I just think not only is he coming in like a rocket, he can start to put pressure, not even put pressure, but make the people around him will have the implication of, hey, you got to get up to speed with this guy. If you really want to win, you want the spoils that come with it, you got to get on board and understand that, again, somebody who swings big is trying to do great things, doesn't want to hear why you can't. And, yeah, he'll run into restrictions. He's going to lose a game or two somewhere along the line here. And there's going to be some of that. So let's see how they respond to that. But I think you like the approach going in for sure.
And what you said earlier about Greg Robinson and building the staff stands out. Now, to be fair, Greg Robinson wasn't hired until late December and was put at a disadvantage right off the bat.
And the budget.
Of course. Yeah, this budget is much higher, and the staff is impressive. And it's the connections, certainly, that Fran has made. All coaches kind of have that web that they go to of people that they've worked with. But to see Elijah, and I'm going to leave some names out of this here, but Elijah Robinson and the recruiting reputation he has, Nick Williams and the recruiting reputation he has. You bring in a guy that was with the New England Patriots, and I know that, as we speak, Bill Belichick has not moved on, and that era may be over, but that still brings weight. And almost every coach that they've brought in and a couple that they've retained, there's some weight there. There's a reason there. You can look directly at it and say, oh, I get it, why that guy's on the staff. So that puts Fran at an advantage that maybe Robinson and maybe a couple other coaches just could not hit the ground running with.
There's no question. And I think you got to be fair to Robinson in that, again, with looking back in history's got to say, look, they just didn't have the resources then that they have now. And again, Syracuse doesn't have the resources now that Georgia does or whatever, but they're far more competitive than it used to be in terms of building the staff the right way, and obviously at the highest level is borderline obscene. I mean, you look at the staff directory or the football staff of an SEC school, and it goes on for 4 pages, and they've got, 15 analysts and whatever. Well, those are the ones who are really doing the nitty gritty of breaking down opponents, breaking down recruits, kind of doing this grassroots work. And, we can go on and on about that, but that stuff has improved here over time. Clearly, I would say the overall coaching staff top to bottom right now is as strong as it's ever been, with the asterisk of, look, you got to be just fair and objective about it. The head coach has never been the head coach and going through those types of things that head coaches do, right? And all of those things, so, but what's happened so far, at least on paper, roster building, staff building, has been A+.
Matt, I really appreciate your perspective on this. There's going to be so much to get into. Basketball, of course, and lacrosse and the spring sports are going to come in. But as I noted, football is going to kind of nudge its way into the conversation a lot more than maybe it used to. And it's going to be fascinating to follow that. Really appreciate your time and your perspective and hanging with us here on Syracuse Sports. We'll definitely do it again. But thanks for your time today, my friend.
Yeah, happy to do it. And again, football drives the bus in the industry, so that's part of it too. Maybe people, myself included, learn about it. It is a 12-month thing, right? So get ready for it. It'll be a ride.
My thanks again to Matt Park, the voice of the Orange, for joining us. My thanks again to you, our terrific Syracuse Sports Insiders, for being a part of this podcast. Sign up today, friends. Be part of the club. It's been incredible to see how far we've come, but we've got a lot more coming in 2024. Looking forward to growing our community. Be a Syracuse Sports Insider by texting the word orange to 315-847-3895. Try it free for a couple weeks. See what we're doing, what the content we're sending. Send me texts like, hey, can you check on this? Can you check on that? That's what I'm here for, guys. The back and forth has been incredible, getting to know some of our Syracuse Sports Insiders, seeing you guys at games, and it's only going to get bigger in 2024. Be a part of the club before, everybody's in, man. The bandwagon's getting heavier. We would love for you to be a part of it. So as I mentioned, you try free for 2 weeks, and then it's just $3.99 a month after that. Thanks for your great feedback on this podcast. And as always, a couple of programming reminders, depending on when you're watching or seeing this. Post-game shows to come after Syracuse basketball takes on Boston College. That's Wednesday night. Saturday, they take on North Carolina in Chapel Hill. We'll have live post-games for both of those games coming up with your feedback as always. New assignment for you guys, too. Now, this is just for home games because I don't travel with the team generally. But we're trying a new feature out where I go into the locker room and we kind of pull some of the best quotes from the players. Because typically the media, you go into the locker room, you get a few quotes, and it makes a story or it's a soundbite on TV or whatever the case may be. And we felt like maybe there's a little bit more we can do with that. Not only on the podcast, but I'm going to write a story about this on syracuse.com. It's going to show up the day after home games. And we're going to try it out, see how it goes. But you guys as insiders have a real advantage here because you can text me and say, hey, Brent, ask Judah Mintz this. Hey, Brent, can you ask Quadir Copeland that? Hey, Brent, can you ask Coach Autry this? Which is something you guys always had the ability to do. But now that I'm focusing a bit more on it at home games, let me know what you're thinking there. Of course, your feedback during games and your comments highlighted on our upcoming post-game shows. So that's a couple of things in the works there. More to come. Knock on wood here. Uncle Brent's working on some big guests for you guys, so we'll see if those come through here in the next week or so. Looking forward to, I don't want to give anything away, but I think you'll enjoy it. I just will leave it at that. Thanks for checking out this episode of Syracuse Sports. Thanks to our friends at Krause Health, the official healthcare partner of SU Athletics. We will talk to you next time, guys.